Hi. The book that I'll be sharing with you today is Farewell to Manzanar, and it's by Jeannie Wakatsuki Houston and her husband James Houston. It's the true story about Jeannie's experience growing up as a Japanese American during World War II and beyond. The story begins with the bombing of Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. And at that point, the nightmare for Jeannie's family really begins. Think about it for a second. Put yourself into this situation. The country is bombed by Japan. You're Japanese. Maybe you've lived here for 30 years. Maybe you were born here. Maybe you've never even been to Japan. You've lived in this country your whole life. But none of that matters because Japan is the enemy and you look Japanese, and that makes you a perfect target for all of the fear and the anger and the hatred that was broiling up in this country. We wanted revenge for the attack from the Japanese, and you were really the perfect target for that attack as a Japanese American. And that's exactly what happened to Jeannie's family in this book. In the book, we get to walk alongside her as her father is arrested and her family is moved into an internment camp called Manzanar in California in the desert. We see the way Jeannie and her family are treated and the awful living conditions that they face in the camps. One passage that I'd like to read to you today comes from the beginning of the book. Pearl Harbor has just been bombed, and Jeannie's family watches as the men of their community are gradually rounded up by the FBI and taken away. So the passage begins with Papa's arrest. If Papa were trying to avoid arrest, he wouldn't have gone near the island, but I think he knew it was futile to hide out or to resist. The next morning, 2 FBI in fedora hats and trench coats, like out of a 30s movie, knocked on Woody's door, and when they left, Papa was between them. He didn't struggle. There was no point to it. He had become a man without a country. The land of his birth was at war with America. Yet after 35 years here, he was still prevented by law from becoming an American citizen. He was suddenly a man with no rights who looked exactly like the enemy. About all he had left at this point was his tremendous dignity. And he would not let those deputies push him out the door. He led them out the door. The thing that strikes me most about this book is the incredible dignity that the Japanese Americans had. Even when the government was stripping everything away from them, they kept their dignity. It was very important. This passage about her father's arrest is a great example of how important their dignity was and still is to them. In our own community of Kingsburg, we still have people alive who were interned in the camps. Some of our students here have grandparents that were interned. They lost everything, and then they came to Kingsburg to put the pieces back together, settle down, and raise their families. You can look at our old yearbooks from 1941, 1942, and see the faces of these young men and women who looked just like you, who were involved in sports and did all of the things that you were involved in. And yet they weren't able to graduate from Kingsburg High School because they were sent off to internment camps with their families. And some of them even volunteered to fight in World War II. This book is a great way to learn about the history of our community and the history of our country. It's a great read, and it's showing you kind of a dark part of our history that isn't always covered as much as it should be in our history classes. If you want to learn more about Japanese internment, come to the library. We have old yearbooks for you to look at, tons of old yearbooks, and we also have a collection of old letters that were sent between a teacher and her student who was in the camps throughout the war. I have 2 binders full of them, and they're really cool to look at and read through. It gives you that first-person primary source, that first-person point of view of what life was like, both in our town and in the camps themselves. We also have a large number of nonfiction books and resources, films, on the history of Japanese internment. That's probably one of our largest collections in the library. So I hope that you consider reading this book and come into the library anytime and check out some of those cool materials we have. Thank you very much.